Welcome back to That Entrepreneur Show. I'm your host, Vincent A. Lanci.
And I'm Trent Clark.
I'm excited to start up this second run of Rewind the Clock bonus episodes with a guest who has become a good friend since his first episode aired. Each week on this platform, I interview a different entrepreneur from across the globe. I will continue to offer episodes in all industries to provide you with many different perspectives. You never know which motivational journey will inspire you most. Each guest will take you through their story and help you learn from their successes and lessons learned. For Rewind the Clock episodes, I will bring back previous guests as they are continuing to make news headlines and grow their brands. For this week's episode, we have a guest returning all the way back from season 2, episode 44 overall. He has 3 World Series rings and entrepreneurial experiences that have shaped him to who he is today, which is now an international speaker, owner, investor, and entrepreneur organization member, and global contributor for mentorship programs. He energizes audience as a speaker, telling his story of overcoming obstacles and sacrifice, the weight of the ring, experience of living the dream of pro sports and their lessons, and teach companies the growth positioning system, along with the key behaviors of leadership and tools in a leadership role. He currently serves the transition team and is the CEO and Chief Leadership Officer of Leadershipity. So allow me to now introduce Trent Clark. Trent, it's great to connect with you again.
Vincent, so honored to be back. It's always fun to sit down and talk some shop with you and talk with fellow entrepreneurs who are listening in and the challenges we all face.
Yes. Would you mind please reintroducing yourself to our listeners and previewing your story just a little bit without giving away too much of your entrepreneurial journey and recent news?
Yeah, I think you did a pretty nice job. I mean, I've started now 11 different companies and excited about the entrepreneur adventure. Spend really most of my time with entrepreneurs and founders and CEOs of companies. Most people do know me, like you said, for my 12 years in professional baseball. And I coached a long time there, getting the chance really to go to 3 World Series with both the Cleveland Indians and the Los Angeles Angels, all before I was 33 years old, right? So happening pretty fast. Also worked with the Tigers in Detroit, and being a Michigan kid, that was pretty cool as a hometown kid. And so, a lot of good experiences with a lot of great people.
Yeah, and a great lesson right away here for everybody listening on is to be networking. Trent and I connected at PodFest, I guess 2 years ago now, as this one's coming up. It's great to have you back, Trent.
Thank you for having me. So excited.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to get into the Big 5, which is the same series of 5 questions to help you, the listeners, learn what it's really like to be an entrepreneur. And for Rewind the Clock episodes, we will have a Big 5 of its own. You ready to go, Trent?
I'm ready.
Great. It's been a while since you connected with our listeners. I'm happy to see your continued success. Let's revisit the business you introduced to us on your first episode. Let us know what's going on, and then we'll hop into some recent news.
Yeah, so on that first episode, obviously, we talked about Leadershipity, which is my main business, and then also Transitions Teams, which was just kind of launching at that time, which was pretty exciting for me, talking about entrepreneurs, founders, athletes who are transitioning either from a sale or a change in career. And of course, as you and I both know, 2020 was the absolute year of transition, right? Everybody got stifled a little bit in what we were doing before. And I'm no different, right? Like, as I sit there and I had a pretty thriving speaking business, doing a ton of events and engagements, which all stopped, right? Like I literally cleared the deck on every event I was supposed to be doing. And in fact, your first podcast, we were able to schedule because I was supposed to be in Ecuador speaking, and
Right.
it all got canceled. And we were battling that travel schedule we both had at the time.
We have certainly had a pivot in COVID, and entrepreneurs like us, we just found new ways to grind. I'm excited to learn more about what you've been doing behind the scenes. As you mentioned, we're now at 11 businesses that you've started. We've touched on Leadershipity now. Let's now talk about some of these new endeavors that you've embarked on since season 2's episode.
Yeah, so when we talk about transition teams, that was really really focused on how do sellers of a business really do that really well. And that's such a big challenge for companies now. And we really have a proprietary playbook, both on the buy and the sell side, of how companies can really do that. We're currently forming forums, which we're excited about, because let's get in and learn. I think most businesses, most of us only own one or two, right? Like we start this company or we buy a company, and we run that. And often people, right now we have this massive influx of baby boomer businesses that really need to be transitioned. They need to
Yep.
be in some level of succession. So how are we going to do that? And of course, this is the one-time event that you may sell your company. And a lot of us in entrepreneurship, this is our retirement, right? Like not everyone got a 401k set up and then did a program for everybody. So the real retirement's based on the sale of that company. And of course, because we only do it one time, we don't have a bunch of experience in getting ready for, as a seller, what a buyer is looking for. And then from a buyer standpoint, what should we be looking under those rocks for when we're trying to buy a company? So working on both sides has become really fun and really educational, because both have very different lenses, right?
Can imagine the experiences are quite different. It's great how you put that, where we don't have the 401k. This is our baby that eventually we're going to
Yeah.
grow. Right now, I see when people do retire, they get bored, they're around the house and stuff. I think with us in entrepreneurial mindsets, we're always on to the next thing. And you mentioned you're on 11 now, but I want to backtrack a little bit to a question that I think can help everybody listening on. We've all been going through this COVID-19 lockdown. You spoke briefly about how almost everything you had was canceled. Let's discuss that with our listeners, maybe try to relate with them a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was really a big pivot. That was about 25 to 30% of our top line revenue. And more importantly, I think, Vince, for us, was that was a key to our marketing effort. Because when we had myself going out there and a couple other coaches going out there and speaking about leadership and teams and how we do that really well, and we had a really nice platform in front of a very targeted audience of founders and entrepreneurs. And all of a sudden, that spigot turned off. Like, hey, now we got to reinvent how we market. And so we really had to get very serious about the idea of social media and what we're doing digitally, and like you and I are doing the podcasting and webinars and things in that case, to continue to educate our target audience about what we're doing. And probably one of the biggest pivots we made, and we really felt this for a long time, was we really felt like we had to move to something more tangible for our teams. And we've done a lot of playbooks in the past for our members and clients, so that each person has their own personalized playbook. And one of the things I discovered, Vince, in this business was, accountability has kind of gotten a negative connotation, right? It's kind of like a 4-letter word now, right? And I'm thinking like, no, that's a good thing, right? Like, we want accountability with our teams. We want visibility. We want these iddies in our business. And now all of a sudden, accountability and visibility was really tough due to COVID, and we're all remote learning. And a lot of companies pivoted overnight to a remote environment, of which they'd never had one in the past. So they don't know if, Jane and Aish are sitting at home and they're like in their penguin pajamas all day, or if they're like, hey, how are we going to do visibility? So we had to get really wise. And so we put in together some software to back up, called DD Ops, Data Driven Operations. And it was so critical for 3 reasons, really, Vince. The first reason was we had a bunch of team members now that were just spread out and not connecting in the same way. So how do we do our daily huddle and do that really well, and get visibility on camera where everybody sees each other and do that really well?
Yeah.
So then the second thing was, how do we get tied to accountability back on what my role and responsibility is? And that's really easy for most of us in companies, because when we offer a job, we have this great laundry list of this is what the roles and responsibility of that job are, right? And then we go, okay, you were hired to do this. And then no one ever actually fact checks that back to like, hey, you were hired to do this. And it turns out you're doing 50% of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, if I hired you to do all these things, I'm sure that my employees are going to be pretty frustrated if I only paid them 50% of the salary I offered, right? Hey, I offered you 80. I'm paying you 40. How do you feel? Like, whoa, wait a minute. That's not okay. Like, no, that's right. That's not okay. So conversely, is it okay for our employees to give 50% of the responsibilities that they signed on for the full salary? So we got to kind of get that back to accountability. And I think like there's that challenge of uh wow, accountability feels like micromanagement sometimes. Well, there's deadlines and there's requirements. We all went to university, we went to school, we had tests. It's not like the teacher says, "You know what? It's fine if you're not ready this Friday. How about next Friday, Vince? Then you could take the test." No one does that, right? Like there's accountability to it. The third thing, of course, is really the coachability, because that data-driven information that now comes in gives our leaders who didn't go to school to be coaches, right? Like they went to school to study engineering or study
Mhm,
marketing or retail or whatever their specialty is, and likely what they built their business on.
mhm.
Now they've got to coach all these employees. Now we give them data-driven information that have been input from the employees themselves. And we can fact check that and get all this data, and we own the data. Facebook doesn't own the
I
data.
love that.
Twitter doesn't own the data. Our companies
Huge.
own the data. So now all of a sudden we put everybody in this funnel of driving things to that top. And it's super exciting to watch it. And coming from what you just saw in Tampa Bay, right? Like, come on. Like this whole group just went through a funnel of Tom Brady's world and how he brings us to it. And what happens with great teams when you get focused is crazy.
One of the things I really love how you always emphasize is accountability. And unfortunately, people who don't hold themselves accountable may feel that's micromanaging. But as an entrepreneur, one of the most frustrating things is when I'm trying to do work with other people or collaborate and they don't take accountability for either the meeting day or the work provided. People are having virtual workplaces for the first time ever.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole world is completely changing. And of course, pivoting myself as well. We did 3 books during the pandemic, obviously not all
Yes.
released. You've got a chance to see Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health.
Yes. Yes.
That was my pride and joy. To shout out Chris Bridge again. Pleasure to work with her throughout the pandemic. We couldn't meet. She was in Houston, Texas. I was in Tampa, Florida, and we completed a whole book that I have really high aspirations for and think it's going to positively impact a ton of lives.
Yeah, I know. I think so too. I think it's really, I mean, what a great use of pivot. And I think it's back to that discipline, Vince, that you
Hmm.
talked about from your days as a cross country athlete and a great baseball player
Hmm.
and all that you had to work to compete at the level you were at. You've taken now that self-discipline. And I love like John Wooden's pyramid, right? Like he's so good on how we can progress. And when he talks about that conditioning, we talk about conditioning ourselves physically.
Hmm.
But what we don't talk about is conditioning ourselves mentally and morally, right? And this is where I think that's really so evident now when we come into it. And I love what one of his longtime players, Bill Walton, said about that is like, hey, learn to discipline yourself so others don't have to.
It's
Ooh,
true.
man, how that stung. I was like, oh, because you and I have been on the end of like
Yeah.
discipline. We were late for something like, hey, Lanci Clark, go run a couple miles. You're late again. You're like, oh, crap, man. Like, we got to get ourselves together, right? Like, we messed up. We own it. We take responsibility, but discipline yourself so others don't have to. That's a big deal. People think like, oh, well, if I don't do it, like others aren't going to hold me accountable. Oh no, they are. They're going to discipline you. And sometimes that discipline gets to the point where you can no longer work at this organization.
I was going to say, yeah.
This is the new discipline. Like, I think you're going to have to find discipline. We don't have any patience for you here, Trent, anymore. So you take it somewhere else and learn your discipline, because our teams need accountability and we need that responsibility. And if you can't navigate it, I get it, but good luck somewhere else.
Especially in those environments, like you're saying, people may be watching, but not saying something right away, saying if the behavior repeats again and again. And then all of a sudden, like you said, for whatever reason, you felt entitled not to perform your tasks. Now you're on the wrong end of that. But through baseball, through your leadership programs, Trent, you've obviously been given a lot of great advice throughout your life. Let's talk about the best piece of advice you were ever given
Oh
and
my
who is it
gosh.
from?
Yeah, I think the last time we were together, I really talked about one of my strongest ones, which came from that Major League
Mhm.
Baseball coach, which was one of, encouragement. You've got what it takes. and careful whom you seek your advice from, right? Like be very
That was a big
cautious
one. Yeah.
on who you get that. I would say another one, when I was a young entrepreneur, I was studying and I was looking at all these books, and I really admired this one book, and a couple books actually. There was an author named Harvey McKay, and I started studying him a little bit because Mr. McKay was a founder of a major envelope company, and he was very innovative on how he did things, and it was impressive. He also happened to be the owner of the Minnesota Twins, right? So I thought, hey man, I got to connect with this guy, and I did through a mutual friend, and I sent him a letter, telling I admired his work. This is what I was doing, and I think I was coaching with the Tigers at the time, and so I kind of had that baseball connection. And he sent me this box one day, and he sent me this box of all his books. Beware of the naked man who offers you his shirt. He has all these great titles, right, of his books. And he really was the first person I really remember who was a writer who broke down the information in these small nuggets. And he wrote me a handwritten note, and he said, Trent, don't just read these books, study them. And I was like, that's right. It's like what we learn, it's kind of back to that word, that study that we have to do about how do we really learn. We have to get in and get deep into it and test it with our theories and saying, hey, I read this, Vince, what do you think? Oh, you see this lens from this way, and wow, I haven't thought about it that way. Let's talk about that, get into discussion. And there's a lot of different ways we learn, but I'm always reminded of James 1:22, right? Don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, you mean I'm supposed to not just read this word, but I have to do it too? Like, yeah. Study the information, and then you got to go out and do it. And that's
Yep.
not easy, right? That's not easy. Simple, remember, but not easy.
We can read a lot of books, but if we don't go back and reapply what we learned every once in a while, the information is just information. But since we're on books, as entrepreneurs, we are always constantly learning, Trent. If you could go ahead and recommend one book to our community of
Oh
entrepreneurs,
my gosh.
which book would it be? Who's the author? And describe that book for
That's
us.
really one book with me, man. I mean, I think you're setting me up for failure here. I have so much. It's crazy. I'll tell everybody. I will leave you with one book, but I'm going to tell everybody. Like, listen, you just drink from good books. I mean,
Yep.
Wooden recommended it, and I'm just telling you, drink from them. I mean, get into it. But I would say if you're an entrepreneur, I'm going to tell you of a Jim Collins book that's not so popular because everybody knows Good to Great.
Mm-hmm.
But if you really want to study, how do I really run my company? He wrote a book called Built to Last, which I think is probably one of his best works. Where he really did a ton of research and development on these successful Fortune 1000 companies that were sustainable, right? Sustainability, one of those big idiots that we all want in our business because we know the numbers, right? How many companies make it 5 years down the road? There's so few. And Built to Last is where I would say those entrepreneurs really got to get in, and don't just read it, study it.
I love how you're emphasizing studying good books. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, one thing I wish I had gotten involved in a little earlier was if I'm going to be reading these self-help books, there's so many different areas that you can grow either your mind or a different skill set. This pandemic, COVID, I've done a podcast guest book, done a marketing book. I've really gotten the chance just to mix it around. But Trent, normally it would be time for the spotlight story, but on Rewind the Clock episodes, I want to give my guest the opportunity to shout out another entrepreneur, bring light to another entrepreneur's endeavors who's grinding. Who would you like to show some love to today?
Wow, that's a really great question. I'm gonna show some love to a good friend of mine and a client actually named Jill Capella, longtime entrepreneur woman who absolutely is the epitome of grit, right? Who's just started, and her team, she's in the rehabilitation space, and her team is worked with a lot of skilled nursing facilities, which you and I both know is
Yep.
the absolute front line of COVID. 19. These facilities are being challenged, and she has balanced with growth, with grace, with just patience for her team, and under probably just really strenuous conditions. And one of the things I probably admire most about her is in the last 3 years, she has really upskilled her leadership team, and probably positioned them for this moment, even though they didn't know that they would need all those things.
Mhm.
But like, wow, that work that everybody put in is now really being put to use, and just really admire her and the team's work.
You have to link me up with her. I think she sounds like a great fit for this
Oh,
show.
yeah,
I
she's
think
great. ONR is the company, and unbelievable group. Yeah.
everybody be sure to check out O&R. But Trent, I got to thank you so much for coming back on the show. I know the listeners are going to see all the value in your episode. I love how you stressed pivoting. I love how you stressed the good books, because obviously that's what I do. But I also loved right in the beginning when you said, hey, this is your baby. This is our retirement fund, because I've never heard someone put it like that before. And I think it is great for entrepreneurs. But as you know, it is time for the last word. And I also do this in my other show too, because I want the listeners to really have the opportunity to get to know my guests. Is there something that you would like to share with everyone that we did not touch on yet today?
Yeah, I think that when we talk about these days more than ever, I would talk about Henry Ford's obstacles are those things you see when you take your eyes off your goals.
Mhm.
And it is now more than ever to get your GPS dialed in. And you've got to have those voices. And we all have it, right? I have this nice British voice, the woman who comes on, and I'm in South Florida going, where do I find Vince's place? And she's like, turn left. And I do it. Right. And she says, turn right. And inevitably, you and I join up at the restaurant, right? Because she's directing how I get there. And I think, when you're talking about your company, we have the growth positioning system, the GPS, and we have to get good voices, trusted advisors that you can listen to. And our system is one of intent. Now more than ever, you need intent. You need to imagine exactly where you want to go and get that vision very clear. You need goals, and need goals. You should have some. No, you need goals. It's focus. You need a target reason for exactly what is your purpose for doing this. You cannot never lose sight of that. There are going to be tough days on this entrepreneurial journey. You need
Yep.
to go back to why I'm doing this. When they told me I couldn't do it, and I said I could, and I believed in myself, and other people did, this is my target reason. Make my parents proud, help
Mhm.
others, whatever that is for you. Target reason. You need an extensive plan, not
Mhm.
just oh, hey, we whiteboarded a couple things. It's an extensive plan on how we're going to do it. Plan the work the plan,
Mhm.
and necessary execution. You need execution on these things, but you need the necessary items, and team members have to know their roles or what's necessary for them. I see a lot of entrepreneurs get tied up in tons of execution, many of which is not necessary. They're tied into like, ooh, I got it done. Guess what? I went and got the mail, Vince. Woo! Like, I don't know if that's necessary execution for you getting the next 3 clients. So necessary execution. Lastly, track it and get a trusted advisor. Track it and a trusted advisor. Have someone to bounce off. Those trusted advisors around you are going to catch your drift. Have
Mhm.
that
Couldn't
intent.
agree
Your
more.
GPS will be very tight on where you're going. And then when you have that, you don't need to worry about those obstacles, because you will be on that road to where you want to go. And you have actually now guardrails up to help you from going off that road. It's going to keep you along, it's going to keep you in your path. Your intent will be tight, and your GPS will be strong.
Couldn't have asked for a better last word. If people want to hear all of that positivity and everything related to you, where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn at Trent M. Clark. They can find me at Twitter and both Instagram at Trent M. Clark or Leadershipity. And that's usually where everyone, of course, leadershipity.com, www.leadershipity.com is where you can find us, and our YouTube channel too, in which we'll be posting this podcast, on the YouTube channel, so everybody can hear it again.
Be sure to check out all of his great content, and it is also social media time for the show, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at That Entrepreneur Show on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And on Twitter, we're at Podcast by Lanci. So you have updates from this show and a mental health break. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci for all social media and YouTube. And my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I would love to hear from you. We have Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. All are on my website now. And as always, I will end the show with a quote that inspired me and know it will for you too. As we have a leadership expert on the show today, I will introduce the quote from another in Tony Robbins. He said, "If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten." Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of That Entrepreneur Show.